Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Bob Kress. I'm the COO for Accenture Security based here in Chicago, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the Business Technology Forum at the Executives Club, along with Mark Lafferty from CDW. Mark is sitting right here. Before we get started, we have a few folks that we'd like to thank for making this event possible. First, I'd like to thank the American Writers Museum for co-hosting this event and opening up the incredibly interactive and interesting space. I have to admit, it's the first time that I've been here, but thank you very much, and I plan to come back. So thank you. A round of applause for the American Writers Museum. I'd also like to thank Brad and Chris for being here this morning for this conversation. I think we're all very excited to hear your insights, and would like to thank Microsoft and Brad also for providing us with the complimentary copies of your book. So thank you very much. We also have a number of special guests in the audience today that I'd like to take a moment and introduce another very important person without whom we wouldn't have the book, and that's Brad's co-author, Carol Ann Brown. Carol, where are you? Right here, right in front. Thank you, Carol.
You're welcome.
I'd also like to recognize members of the Board of Directors at the Executives Club of Chicago and the American Writers Museum. Thank you for taking the time to join us for this important conversation about the future of technology. Tools and Weapons grapples with some of the biggest questions of the digital age: privacy, security, the weaponization of technology, moral hazards, and so forth. It's a topic that I spend a lot of time on personally discussing with boards because it puts you in an interesting dilemma. Where on that technology spectrum do you want to be? You need to be aggressive enough so that you as an organization are not at risk of being disrupted. But at the same time, if you're too aggressive and you move too rapidly, you need to understand the risks that you're taking. And being in the cybersecurity business, with all new technology, there is an element of cybersecurity that wraps around it and needs to be addressed as part of the overall risk. So I think today, Chris Gladwin, who's the CEO and co-founder of Ocient, did I pronounce that right, Chris? Ocient, and Brad Smith, president of Microsoft, are going to lead us in a discussion about this topic and many others. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming these folks for the great panel. So thanks, Brad and Chris.
All right, thanks so much. So first off, the reason we're here is because of you and your book. You grew up in Wisconsin. You know, since we're Midwesterners, I think we get all excited about that. So tell us, tell us, how did you get from there to, where you are at Microsoft? What was that journey like?
Well, it certainly was, frankly, not a journey I, grew up expecting. Obviously, I grew up in a world that didn't have computers. I was, born in 1959. But I was very interested in the issues of the world and pursued a career in law, among other things. And in 1984, a year after I had gotten married, my wife, who grew up in New York, and I had spent a year during law school studying in Geneva, Switzerland. We actually spent 2 summers here in Chicago. We came very close to living in Chicago. I was sort of advocating for Chicago. My wife, as a New Yorker, was advocating for New York, and we compromised on Washington, D.C. But in 1984, there was this new thing called a personal computer. It was just becoming popular. And it's really fitting, I think, to be here this morning because what attracted me to the PC was the ability to use it to write. Obviously, as an undergraduate, as a law student, I was like, wow, it can be better than a typewriter. And so I got fascinated with PCs. And so, began a law career, sort of became known as the person who was interested in computers, in part because when I got an offer while working for a judge in New York at the law firm I really wanted to go to, Covington and Burling in DC. I said I wanted to come work there, but I would only accept the offer if they would give me a PC for my desk.
Yep.
And no one had asked for that before. And they were like, well, why do you want that? We have secretaries that do that stuff.
Yep.
And I said, I can write better and I can write faster if I have my own computer. And so, interestingly, it set me apart from the other young lawyers. People knew that this was something I was interested in. And a few years later, when there was an opportunity to even just start to think about developing business for the young PC software industry, people thought, well, there's this weird guy up on the 12th floor. He likes this stuff. Let's see what he wants to do to help us. And one thing led to another. I started to do work for the software industry. I basically, as an associate, found myself in the position of building the legal practice in London and across Europe for our firm in a new London office. Then another thing led to another, and the folks at Microsoft asked me, just as I was becoming a partner, if I would be interested in joining the company and moving from London to Paris. And ended up taking what was supposed to be a 2-year leave of absence from the law firm that started 26 years ago and hasn't ever ended, and joined Microsoft in Paris.
You think
for
that
3
offer's
years.
still open?
There came a point where I said, I'm not coming back. But that was 26 years ago. Spent 3 years in Paris, and then when my boss retired, moved to the Seattle area. Never lived there before. It's just been a constantly fascinating journey as digital technology has changed and broadened, and every year seems to be impacting the world in ways we couldn't have really imagined a decade before.
When Margaret asked me to interview you for this, I paused because I read like the first 3 chapters, and I was only interested really if I wanted to read the rest of the book. And I was, so that's why we're here. But I thought that, so for me, in 1984, I started my first company while I was a sophomore in college. And I was very fortunate because I had seen this brand new thing, the IBM personal computer, and I started a company to do consulting to help large enterprises use them for the first time. And a funny story about that is I sent a proposal to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Ohio, where I was from, to do all their consulting. I won. I was a sophomore in college. I had never touched an IBM PC. But anyways, I just, the joke, like, you don't have to outrun the bear. You just have to outrun your friend.
Yes.
So as long as I could learn faster than everyone else there, I was the expert.
Yep.
But anyways, and so I've been working with Microsoft really since then in various forms. And what I thought was interesting about the book is most of my prior and early interaction with Microsoft would always be about technology and products, and that was the focus of it. But then in reading the book, you talk a lot about what you do and Microsoft does. It wasn't so much about that. It was about policy. It was about politics, data, privacy. So I guess why did you write the book? Because you've obviously got other things to do. Here we are, getting up early, spending time. And why bother to write a book? Why take all this extra time?
Well, you captured a lot of it. Technology is changing the world. I might argue that if you look at all of the forces that are changing our country or the world, almost all of them in some ways are actually being driven by technology. We talk about trade issues. We talk about globalization. We would not be talking about globalization or trade the way we are today if we weren't living in an era of this sweeping digital technology. That's what has made it possible, frankly, for not just manufacturing but services industries to spread around the world the way they have. It is this defining feature of our times. We debate all of the symptoms, if you will, of this era of technological change, and we don't really, in our view, spend enough time thinking about the underlying factors that are unleashing it. So, we wrote the book to broaden the conversation. to bring information about what's happening in the world of technology to more people, to bring the issues of technology policy to more people. But I think most importantly, we hope to frankly make this accessible and interesting to more people. Because we just think these issues are too important to be left to experts alone in the world of, say, computer science or data science, or in the world of people who specialize in public policy. They really impact all of us.
So that was a theme one of the themes in the book was how, as technologies become pervasive, not just information technologies, but technologies in the past like radio or TV, there's this backlash that occurs as people start to digest the effects of that. Is that a part of the purpose to really inform that debate and get both the industry and people at large to kind of effectively deal with this backlash and the power of information technology?
We hope so. First of all, Carol Ann and I both love history. And if you actually were to look at what Microsoft has been involved in on public policy issues in the years that I've been involved in helping to shape it, we've probably been unique in that every time a new issue arises, we ask ourselves, what is it similar to and what can we learn from history? There's a saying that the two of us both love. It's that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So just an issue we don't talk about in the book, but in some ways has its roots here in Chicago, is when patent issues really exploded for smartphones about a decade ago. Between Apple and Google and Samsung and Microsoft, we went back and we said, this is actually very similar to what happened in the 1870s. And everybody would look at us like, what are you talking about? But that was a decade when there was a ferocious battle between Irving Singer, who invented the Singer sewing machine, one of the most transformative inventions of its time. It completely changed the lives of women, perhaps especially on farms across the country. And then on the other side was a fellow, Aaron Montgomery Ward, of Montgomery Ward. Basically it ended up being this huge patent battle that Ward won, but he won by creating the Granger movement, the political movement in the country that mobilized farmers by mobilizing women on farms even though they couldn't vote. And so many times we've thought, you can understand what's coming and you can give yourself some insights as to how to think about it if you actually start to think about some similar issues before. And so the backlash that we're seeing to technology today is similar in some ways to what we saw in the third decade of radio, the third decade of television. One of the things we point out is we're now in the third decade of the internet.
Yeah, and I thought another interesting historical topic you guys explored, which I think also has relevance today, was the change from horse-driven transportation to automobile or engine-driven transportation and the effect that it had on jobs.
Yeah, one of our fundamental theses is we believe that artificial intelligence will be the fundamental enabling invention and technology that will profoundly reshape every economy, say between now and 2050, for 3 decades. And when we look back at the history of technology, you find that the steam engine did that, electricity did that, the combustion engine did that. And the combustion engine is especially interesting. It really made it possible to have cars and tractors on farms, trucks for transportation, airplanes, tanks. None of these things would have been possible without the combustion engine. They fundamentally reshaped societies around the world between 1910 and 1950. And they completely changed this economy from almost literally a horse-drawn economy to an automobile-driven one. And when we went back and teased apart what unfolded, and there are some stories that we love that bring this to life, it had a profound impact. It created a lot of new jobs, it destroyed a lot of old jobs, By 1950, it was fueling American prosperity. But one of the stories we share, I still just find it fascinating, is this report that the US Census Bureau put out in 1932, really saying that the demise of the horse-drawn economy was one of the fundamental causes of the Great Depression. And from the vantage point of 2019, that just seems almost incomprehensible. But when you tease it apart, what you see is that as the horse population declined, it declined by a third from 1920 to 1930, farmers did what you would, of course, expect them to do. They stopped growing the crops that fed horses. So hay, well, we don't need as much hay, and they shifted to crops that humans consumed, and not just by eating, but cotton and tobacco, for example. And so what it led to was overproduction of certain crops, then the collapse of prices for those crops, the collapse of incomes for farmers, the inability of farmers to pay their mortgages to rural banks, the inability of rural banks to pay the urban banks. And what was happening in the middle of Iowa quickly came to Chicago, not just in terms of the financial institutions that were here, but what it meant for all kinds of industries that were supporting farms. And so, it actually changed the country in ways that no one could predict, for which no one was prepared. And then you start to think, wow, it's a roller coaster. And we have to be prepared for a similar roller coaster as AI transforms the economy. And our book by no means has all the answers, but what we're fundamentally trying to do is give people some tools. Some tools that we can all use to think about what might be coming so we can be better prepared for it.
Yeah, and so if you look at those horse jobs, a lot of that displacement occurred in the short term, which is the 30s, the Great Depression. But then you look at the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, all the engine-driven jobs, building a car for everyone's suburbs, roads, financing of cars and car delivery and just on and on. The net effect of both jobs and wealth creation absolutely outpaced the displacement of horses.
Yeah, in the long term, things sort of work out well. And it's almost like a truism because everybody adapts. And undoubtedly that will be the case, so that if you come to this museum in the year 2060, you're gonna be like, it all worked out fine. There's new jobs, there's a bunch of new things that there will be all these jobs that have names that none of us in this room today will recognize. But it's how you get from here to there. And a lot of it, of course, as your question I think basically suggests, part of it is giving people new skills so that they can go pursue the new jobs that will be created.
And you're saying that although you can't predict the future, when you look at AI, it has that same kind of feel where, it will displace some kinds of jobs in the short term, but over the long term, if you're making things more efficient, more creative, ultimately it'll be a net gain.
I think that there is reason to be optimistic. I think it's probably a mistake to be certain. It has unfolded in a similar way for almost 300 years now, since the 1750s and the invention of the steam engine. So there's good reason to be optimistic. But I then think it then comes down to, great, how do you use the new technology to accomplish things that you couldn't accomplish before? That's where the new jobs will be.
Yeah, we're sitting here next to these typewriters that famous writers use. So at some point, the whole typewriter industry got displaced by keyboards.
Well, just think about, I remember, sort of my first exciting job was here in Chicago. It was at a law firm called Isham, Lincoln and Beal that was founded by the son of Abraham Lincoln. And was still going strong in the summer of 1982. And when I walked into that law firm in 1982, basically for every 2 lawyers there was 1 secretary. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you were a partner, for every 1 lawyer there was a secretary. Now you walk into Kirkland or Sidley or any of the big law firms here, and you probably find for every 7 or 8 lawyers, maybe 1 administrative assistant. So think about all the jobs that have gone away. And yet, look at our employment situation at the moment.
Yeah, so another topic you get into in the book is the effect of information technology and data on kind of the distribution of wealth and how, I remember Microsoft's original mission was, a computer in every home, a computer in every office, and it was very much about kind of democratizing information technology. The prior era was the mainframe era where it was concentrated by big corporations. Now everyone's going to have this computing power. True in one sense, but at the same time, in the past 30, 40 years, there has been an increasing amount of concentration of wealth, generally in an information economy. I mean, what happens, is that, if you look out in the future, is that kind of concentration going to get even more pronounced as new waves of information technology come to the world?
Well, this is where technology meets economics, and then the two of them ultimately meet politics, is what I would say. I think that technology, indisputably has contributed to income inequality. I mean, just if you look at the list of the wealthiest people in the country, they often are people who made their money in technology. People who work in the tech sector tend to do quite well. If you look at a lot of the people who've done more poorly, they are people who had these jobs that, in effect, were displaced by technology. One of the things we talk about is the other forms of inequality that are contributing to income inequality. One is what I would call internet inequality. You go to rural communities, you don't have to go that far from Chicago to get to places in Illinois or southwestern Wisconsin or eastern Iowa where there is no broadband. And we tell the story of these communities. You go to these towns, if there is no broadband, there is no ability to attract jobs. There is no ability to bring in the newest trends in education or healthcare. You look at education inequality. One form of education inequality today, in our view, is the fact that some schools have the courses in computer science and others do not. And so you have some people who just aren't getting the opportunity to master the skills they will need to be successful. So you do see all of these things come together. When you look at history, what you do see, in my view, is this time that started in about 1870 that went for about 35 years, where technology exploded. I mean, we think we live in the most technologically innovative age. I might argue that we live in the second most. What electricity did, what the transcontinental railroad did, what the sewing machine did, what all of the things that ran on electricity did reshaped the world and created enormous inequality in the country. And then there came a day that it changed. And the day it changed, I would say, was September 14th, 1901. And you might ask, what happened that day? It was the day that Teddy Roosevelt became president, because William McKinley died. And if you just read the books about the history of our country, you tend to have the chapter that's called the Gilded Age, and then you have the chapter that's called the Progressive Era. And it started, I would say, that day. And I think that it's not surprising that when you look at politics today, whether you're talking about conservatives or liberals, the solutions are very different. But the fundamental problem they're talking about is actually pretty similar. It is fundamentally, some people are moving forward, others are being left behind, and that takes us back, in our view, to the role that technology is playing, and then hence the role that technology policy will probably need to play in addressing some of these underlying issues.
But isn't there a fundamental conflict in a business has to focus on maximizing its business efficiency and profits? And when you kind of hit these junctures where it's like, well, we could further maximize profit, but maybe we're not, doing the right thing with regard to privacy or social equality, but to do the right thing has a cost. Like, isn't it inherently difficult for an organization, even Microsoft with its unbelievable financial prowess? it's hard to say, no, I'm not going to maximize my profit. I'm going to do more to make rural broadband a reality, even though that's not as profitable. Like, aren't there limits on what companies can do?
Well, there absolutely are limits, and I think one of the really important questions for a company to do is to ask itself how it will decide. And one of the questions that we've grappled with over the last 5 years or so is, when will we use our voice, or when will we hold ourselves back on these broader issues? And we share the story, especially we have a chapter on AI and ethics, and then facial recognition, because both of these are areas where we've had to address these issues. And when the case went to the Supreme Court 4 weeks ago on DACA, for the Dreamers, there was only one company that was a litigant in that case. It was Microsoft. And there were 145 others that joined on as an amicus. But you might ask, why did we do that? And was it even appropriate for us to do it? We did it because we have 66 employees who are DACA registrants. And we share in the book that we've been comfortable saying there are 3 areas where we'll lean in. One is when our customers are being impacted by these issues and the use of our technology. So it has been a very interesting and challenging journey that we share in the book to decide to frankly take on a nation, Russia, and its attacks on our customers. And to stand up and say these attacks are coming from this government, and even name names. But we said where our customers are being hurt, in their role as our customers, we will stand up for them. Second, we've said we will stand up for our employees. In a tech company, it's all about your next innovation. It's all about your employees. And so we've said where our employees are impacted, not just in their ability to work, but their ability to live in this country, their ability to rent or buy the home, to marry the person of their choice, we will stand up for them. That's why we were one of the companies that was really out at the edge on marriage equality. And then we've said, and then of course there are all the other issues in our business, including the taxes we pay or how we're impacted by trade deals. And if there's one area where I actually find myself having constantly to be leaning inside the company, it will be, no, we won't actually offer facial recognition to the government in China because of our concerns about how it's being used with respect to human rights. No, we won't build a data center in that country because once the data goes into that country, it can be used to really persecute or worse the citizens in that country. And then you do ask, is this making us less profitable? In the long run, in my view, absolutely not. I fully believe that in the long run, the profitability of our company and the interests of our shareholders are inextricably intertwined with our ability to stand up and advance these broader issues. So in a way, the message to our investors is, look, if you want to buy a stock on Wednesday and sell it on Thursday, don't pick us. But if you want to buy a stock in 2019 and have confidence that it will be more valuable in 2029, think about us and think about our approach to business.
Is that part of why in parts of the book you call for regulation in certain areas? Because if you've got a market where it is significant cost to be socially responsible and only one participant in the market makes that choice, then everyone else in the market has this advantage. Is that part of your thinking, well, when that's true, then really what you want is regulation so that everyone has to do the right thing and bear that cost?
Generally, yes. I mean, regulation is hard, and whenever anybody from a business perspective says, gee, I think our industry would benefit from more regulation than it has today, it's easy for people to say, wow, you must be either, just incredibly naive or just, completely lacking in basic intelligence. And I would first say, I don't think I'm naive. I am the only person who is working in business today, who can stand up anywhere in the world today and say, I had to defend my company when it was facing a court order to be broken up by the United States Department of Justice in 20 states. So no company has had to go through what I would argue were some of the worst aspects, at least the hardest aspects, of colliding almost with the world of government and regulation than Microsoft. And we learned a lot from that, and we share those lessons. What I would say, what we say in the book, is think about the world that we live in. You'll go to the grocery store and you'll pick up food items on the shelf and you will read the nutrition labels and you will know that you can read them because there is a regulation that requires that everybody provide them in a standard way. You will walk over to the pharmacy and you will buy a product over the counter or prescribed. And you know what? You don't ask yourself, I wonder if this is safe. I'm afraid it's not. Because there is a Food and Drug Administration. You will go into your car, you will put on your seatbelt, you will have confidence that the airbag will work because there are safety standards. And look, just think about the #1 technology regulatory issue of the year that is about to conclude. It was all about the cockpit of an airplane. And at the end of the day, a world without regulation is a world where I actually believe the public has less confidence in our products. And a world where the public has less confidence in your products is not great for business. Mm-hmm. And then you look at the world of digital technology. We're arguably in the 7th decade of that world. No technology in the history of technology has gone unregulated for as long as this technology. And that's one of the reasons I think we're finding this backlash against technology today.
Okay, so we're getting ready for audience question time. Some of the topics that we didn't cover were privacy. You can get a privacy question. I'll ask a question if you guys don't. So let me pause here and say, any questions from the audience? Anything? Yes, sir. And there's a mic that's going to appear right behind you. Look at that.
It's magic. My name is Dominic Perry, and I'm part of the conscious capitalism movement here. The conscious capitalism chapter started by John Mack gave Whole Foods. John Mack gave Whole Foods 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. And one of the tenets is the business ought to be a force for good, ought to look at multiple stakeholders. And I'm just, one of the things we noted was the Business Roundtable statement back in August, shifting the purpose and the focus of a corporation to a wider perspective of multiple stakeholders, as you just did, as you talked. And I'd like to just hear you talk a little bit about, do you feel like there's beginning to be a movement towards that to say, yes, the bottom line, but a broader perspective as you just articulated?
Yeah, no, we love the Business Roundtable statement. We're not a member of the BRT, but I was involved personally in talking with them as they put it together. I really like what emerged because they not only, in my view, talk about the different stakeholder groups that I think a business should consider, but I think they put it in the right order. They start with customers. I mean, look, how do you advance the interests of shareholders if you don't focus on the needs of customers? So think about your customers, think about your employees, think about the broader groups, including communities. One of the things we talk about in the book is some of the issues that have arisen in Seattle around affordable housing, and the fact that in our view, you can't have a healthy business if it's not part of a healthy community. And then ultimately, as I described before, in our view, all of these things at the end of the day absolutely accrue to long-term shareholder value. So I do believe it is the right approach. And I think that at the end of the day, there is this interesting dichotomy, and there was a reaction to this BRT statement that said, no, it's all about investors. It is about shareholders. Don't forget us. And my view is I think it's mostly a false dichotomy. The real tension is not between multiple stakeholders and shareholders. It is between short-term and long-term capital appreciation. And I would argue that if you look at the decade that's now ending, Microsoft is actually a good example of a company that embraced this multi-stakeholder approach that the BRT is now endorsing, especially after the beginning of 2014 when Satya Nadella became our new CEO. And then look at what we have done for shareholders.
Yeah.
Yeah, when in 2013, our share price was $27 a share. And I don't know where it is this morning, but if it's where it closed yesterday, it's probably around $154. We became the most valuable company on the planet. And I would argue that a big reason we were able to do that is because we did think about the world more broadly and the need to serve multiple stakeholders.
Great, thank you very much. I'm going to pass the mic to other folks. I'd be interested if you could just briefly say, if a company wants to move in that direction, what advice would you give them?
Well, the brief advice I would give is, of course, you don't stop thinking about your business, and I don't actually worry that anybody's going to. It is business, after all. We're not a nonprofit, and you have to continue to succeed. But my fundamental advice would be think more broadly, embrace the long term. One of the things that I've been so fortunate over the course of my career to do is work for three amazing CEOs, Bill Gates, Steve Ballmer, Satya Nadella. And all three have this enormous curiosity, this breadth of perspective, and this commitment to long-term growth. And then the other thing that I would just say is, business today is multidisciplinary. A tech company, and it sort of connects to one of the questions you asked, Chris, is, we're an industry that was built by engineers and is still led by engineers, and in my view, needs to be led by engineers. But technology is absolutely a multidisciplinary sport. And almost every company is. You need the people who know how to invent or design the products. You need the people who know how to sell and support the customers. You need the people who understand that you better be able to have a great financial system. You need to create a culture. You need to interact with the world and the world of law. And you need to all do it together. And you need to really appreciate what each other brings to the table. You need each other. And that's a lot of our message inside Microsoft.
Hi, Bridget Thompson, recovering financial services addict, launching a VR business. But my question to you is, as I think about us launching our VR business and manufacturing in China and the whole supply chain, and you think about sustainable business practices and technology playing a part in that, my mind goes all the way to the mines in Africa or India, mining these precious metals. I know that there's a lot of thought and conversation around how do you sustainably mine that without child labor, without kind of archaic tools, and how do you use technology? How are you guys thinking about using technology for that whole supply chain in terms of precious metals to your manufacturers in China, to the intellectual? You guys have a lot of intellectual capital and intelligence and technology that could help that kind of the source of the supply chain. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on how you guys think about that.
Yeah, well, it's a great question because you've captured two or three of the really important and complicated issues and trends in the world today. The phone in your pocket, consists of hundreds, even at times thousands of components if you consider not just all the pieces of hardware, but the pieces of software on it. And so when you just think about the supply chain that produces this pretty small device, it really is extraordinary. One point that you mentioned actually is under great focus today in the United States, which is should the United States be comfortable with so many of those components or the ultimate manufacturing and assembly taking place in China at all. And I think that will be an issue that's going to continue to roil political considerations in Washington, D.C. over the next several years. Another dimension is, as you mentioned, in a way that we don't think about, some of those components in that device, whether it's a phone or say it's one of our Surface devices, does involve precious or rare metals, and they have to be mined. We worry, as we should, and the United States government requires us to worry and report to the Securities Exchange Commission on the labor conditions of the people who are working in those mines. I think technology can help us in part, to know, where each metal came from, especially as we look to a decade where we're going to see increasing use of blockchain and other technologies, just to be able to trace everything back to where it came from. The truth is, I don't know of any tech company, American tech company, that says, we want to do business with a supplier that's treating people inhumanely in a mine in Africa or somewhere else.
No, but sometimes they're just so far removed.
Exactly.
And like my thinking is, if we can artificially manufacture diamonds, can we artificially manufacture mica in the future, or, do you know what I mean?
I think that there's a lot of interesting questions about how technology will change this. One is connecting back to where it's taking place. A second might mean creating new substitutes, as you point out, with technology that artificially do what we're currently having to find natural minerals to do. I also just think that, if you just think ahead to the year 2050, whether it's coal or whether we even use coal, which we probably won't, or anything else that comes out of deep in the earth, I don't know that there's going to be that many jobs for human beings to be going into deep tunnels, a mile underneath the Earth's surface. Yeah. I think that was probably a set of jobs that machines will be automated to do, and self-guided machines with AI. And I always hate to be the one to point out to somebody whose livelihood may depend on a certain job that job may go away. But I have a lot of optimism that we can find better and safer things for people to do and gain a good livelihood than having to go a mile underneath the Earth's surface every day to work in some very difficult conditions.
Yeah, a friend of mine works at Intel and told me that like a normal Intel chip uses pretty much every element in the periodic table that's not radioactive, and they'd use the radioactive ones if they weren't. I mean, the stuff just comes from all over.
Yeah.
Anyway, you have a question?
Jeff Whittemore, Alta Beauty, how are you? I'd like to hear your thoughts about, well, recently the American public made a trade-off of privacy versus security. And when we think towards technology, we're faced with another trade-off, which is convenience versus privacy. Yeah. In the case of personalization and artificial intelligence, what role do you think trust plays in overcoming that barrier?
Well, the first thing I would say is, look, this technology is so ubiquitous and so important to our lives that we darn well better be able to trust it. If we can't, then something's wrong. And so I think we need to keep investing in trust. And then you sort of start to ask, okay, what does trust mean? Well, it means it's technology that's secure, that isn't going to be hacked by criminals or foreign governments. It is technology that does protect your privacy, and I'll come back to that since you mentioned it. It's technology that's safe. Safe in the sense that it works the way you expect it to work in a reliable way, but I think it's also technology that keeps people safe, especially vulnerable groups like children that are exploited online, or all of us, if you think about how terrorists, especially in a place like Christchurch, New Zealand this year, were able to use the internet as the stage for a mass shooting. And I think it actually means, even more importantly in some ways, as we enter the 2020s and look beyond, that as machines are making decisions with artificial intelligence, they're doing so with a set of ethical principles that we understand and have confidence in. So all of these accrue to trust. Now, when it comes to privacy, you know, this decade, the decade that ends in 2 weeks, will have seen almost 50 new nations enact national privacy laws. We will end the decade with 135 countries around the world with strong national privacy laws, but the United States is not one of them. And I think that the fact that the United States has been such a laggard in protecting privacy is a problem. I think it's a problem for Americans ultimately in their ability to trust technology, because at the end of the day, we can keep doing more, but you know, unless you have confidence that you're protected by the law, that there is some level of oversight and governance, that the bad actors are not going to be allowed to be bad actors, that data brokers that today are working with large amounts of data, they're companies you've never heard of, you have no idea that they have your data, that unless we get all of this out in the open, I think people's rights are being undermined in ways that we shouldn't feel good about. And I think that is also bad for the tech sector in the long term. I also think it's bad for the United States as a country and as a government because it gives us less influence in the world. If 135 countries get together to decide where privacy is going and we don't have a seat at the table because we don't have a national privacy law, I think that is a challenge as well. So we have a chapter in the book about the wave of consumer privacy protection that is coming, which we generally are very supportive of. And I think one of the reasons that it's coming is so interesting. It is coming because of California. California adopted a sweeping privacy law in 2018. The reason it came in California was because California has an initiative process. And we tell the story about how Alastair McTaggart, a real estate developer, spent his own money to put it on the ballot. The polling showed it had 82% support from the voting electorate, and that's what led the state legislature to finally pass something. And of course, once California moves, since it has 1 of every 8 Americans, the pressure really moves to Washington, D.C., as it has. I do believe that we'll see a national privacy law in this country by, I'll say, 2021 or 2022, maybe even 2020, but it's finally coming.
You have a question, Andrea?
I do. Thank you. I can talk pretty loud, too. My name is Chandra Brown, and I am the CEO of MXD, the National Manufacturing Digital Institute and the National Center for Cybersecurity. So thank you, Microsoft, for your support. But this question is so critical when you talk about trust and privacy and the issue about supply chain. I just wanted to touch on and really get your advice, particularly, again, for the supply chain and the small businesses. We are desperately trying to bring these companies along the cybersecurity and the digital thread. And you know this, that's the biggest vulnerability. It isn't the large corporations, it's the supply chain. That is where you are going to be vulnerable. So how do we help convince the small businesses and the little folks how critical this is when they know it's their own IP, they know it's their own, but it's just such a big problem. And so we're trying to obviously raise attention to it, but I think it's something that doesn't get talked about enough. And any advice you could give on how we do that? Thank you.
Well, first, I think it does help to talk about the problem. And just to help people learn more, and that's why we spend time in the book describing some of the cybersecurity issues and trends and incidents. And of course, we're really seeing ongoing growth in the sophistication of cyber criminal activity, which is ultimately all about money. It's just how do you find money? It's not just hacking your way into somebody's bank account. It's why ransomware has become so popular. We're going to lock your computer and we won't unlock it unless you pay us money. It's why one of the cybersecurity trends of 2019 is more a focus on any kind of rewards program, because that can be converted into money if people can hack their way and get access to rewards cards, rewards accounts, and the like. So understanding the problem is the first step. The second step, of course, is then understanding what you can do about it. I think that there's 2 things that any organization, nonprofit, business, or government can do. First, and this is admittedly self-serving, but move to the cloud. Why in the year 2020 would you really say I want to have my own server room, or I want to build my own data center, and just figure out how to keep everything current and employ the best security technology on the market? Whether it's Microsoft or AWS or Google or somebody else, make it our problem. We have 3,000 security engineers. We're going to add $1 billion of new security features every year. And if you're running in the cloud, we'll keep it up to date so you don't have to. So that's the first thing. The second thing is actually remarkably simple, even if it is, I'll acknowledge, a little bit of extra work perhaps every day. It's called use two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. What does that mean? It means that if you have an account, an email account, a Facebook account, or whatever, you just go online, you set it up, so that if you then want to access that from a new device, you first have to type in your password. That's the first factor. And then you have to provide a second factor, and usually these days it's your phone. So then you type in your phone number and you get a text message, and then you type in the code that the text delivers, or you answer the phone and enter your password again. What is really interesting is, I would say, speaking generally, 90% or more of cybersecurity attacks can be avoided if a business uses two-factor authentication. 90%. Now, with Office 365, we know precisely what percentage of those accounts for email and documents, PowerPoint, Excel, and the like, what percent actually have two-factor authentication turned on. So just ask yourself, okay, if turning this on will prevent 90% of the attacks that could cause me to lose my email or my documents, what percentage of our users have it turned on?
You want to do over under at 5?
Yeah, it's less than 10. It's less than 10. It's less than 10. And so, the easiest thing for anybody to do is just turn it on. And it's why we sit and have meetings where we're debating, should we turn it on by default? And there will be people who will complain, and then they can always turn it off. But I do feel like we're going to have to just nudge ourselves a little bit more to nudge everybody else to please protect yourself. It's so much easier to spend 10 seconds every fourth day than to suffer something that can literally be calamitous.
All right, well, we're right at 8:55. So, Mark, you're going to deliver some closing remarks.
Yes, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm Mark Lafferty from CDW and also a co-chair of the Executives Club Business Technology Forum with Bob. It's a privilege to be able to host tech leaders of your stature in such an intimate setting. So we'd like to thank you for sharing your vision and candor with us today. Please join me in thanking both Brad and Chris for such a fantastic discussion.
All right.
Thank you.
As we talked about today, we've all become acutely aware of the dangers that tech can pose when society and its safeguards don't evolve at the same pace. This requires courageous leadership from those who have the power to shape the future evolution of the digital world, and responsible engagement with tech consumers all over the world. My takeaway from today was, if one of your goals, Carol Ann and Brad, were to make it interesting and accessible for the learnings that you've shared, you made it accessible. Thank you for the book. And interesting by this discussion, hands down. So once again, thank you all for joining us this morning. If you would like to have your book signed by Brad and Carol, they will be stationed around the corner in the Chicago Gallery for the next 20 minutes or so. On behalf of the Executives Club, have a fantastic holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year. Thank you.
Thank you.